Law is not real exciting. But if we throw out the law, if we throw out the boundaries of our conduct, and we marginalize it, then what guidance do we have for our global community? So very simply, could it possibly be legal to annihilate the future? Could that possibly be allowed under law or morality? I just ask you to think about that, because we now know from science, and science matters and truth matters, that if 100 nuclear bombs were to go off, it would throw at least 5 million tons of soot into the stratosphere, and that would basically end agriculture necessary for civilization and destroy the future. We know this. So we talk about climate change, slow death, slow burn. Nuclear weapons would be a very fast and horrible end, and it cannot possibly be legal. But now I have the privilege of introducing a physician who deals with the realities of human experience, who was one of the founders of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. He is an emergency room physician, so he deals with the real daily life issues of human beings, is very sensitive to the reality of what these weapons could do. It's very important that we deal with the reality of these weapons and get a full grasp of what it means, of what nuclear weapons would do. For this work that this organization that he helped create, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, they rightfully won the Nobel Prize in 1985, but have continued to be a voice of reason and experience for the world. Dr. Hefland, please.
Thank you, Jonathan. Around the world today, young people have been demonstrating against the existential threat posed by climate change, and it has been extremely inspiring to all of us to watch this activism, this mobilization of people concerned to preserve this planet and its ability to sustain life. President de Klerk spoke about nuclear weapons also as an existential threat. And on this question, there's much less attention, particularly among young people, who really do not understand, I believe, the enormity of the threat posed by these weapons. You're not alone in that. People of my age also don't really understand anymore the enormity of the threat posed by nuclear weapons. We used to, but we've forgotten about it. And so it's my job today to remind us all a little bit of what actually is going to happen if nuclear weapons are used. And I want to start by fleshing out a bit the study that I was involved in that Jonathan referenced a minute ago. We used to think that it was only a war between the United States and Russia that would threaten all of humanity. We now understand that a much more limited war, as might take place, for example, between India and Pakistan, would also be a catastrophe, not just for those countries, but for the entire planet. The scenario we looked at more than a dozen years ago involved 50 Hiroshima-sized bombs used by each of the two countries against civilian targets, urban industrial targets in the other country. And what was found in that study was that promptly, within a week, 20 million people would die from the fires, the explosions, and the radiation. But that the more profound effect would be the climate disruption caused by the soot thrown into the upper atmosphere, which would block out the sun, cause climate disruption across the entire planet, and cause a catastrophic decline in food production that would put up to 2 billion people at risk of starvation, not just in South Asia, but everywhere, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, here in Latin America, in Europe and North America as well. That study is in the process of being updated, and new data will be published within the next few weeks. that takes into account the fact that the nuclear arsenals of both India and Pakistan have grown dramatically in the last 12 years. If there is a war today, it will not be 50 weapons on each side. It will be 130 to 150 weapons on each side. And many of these will be much larger than the bomb which destroyed Hiroshima. And the effect of a war fought under today's conditions will be even more catastrophic than our original studies showed. Anywhere from 70 to 120 million people will die in the first week. And the effects on the environment will be several times larger than those which led us to conclude that 2 billion people were at risk. The death of 2 billion people would not mean the extinction of our species. It would mean the end of civilization as we know it. No civilization in all of human history has ever survived a shock of this magnitude, and there is no reason to believe that the very fragile, delicate, interconnected economic order which we all depend on to put food on our tables, that system would survive. That's a limited nuclear war, involving less than 1% of the world's nuclear weapons. A war between the United States and Russia would be much greater, obviously. Let me describe for you briefly what would happen to a modern city in a modern nuclear attack. Many of us have seen images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the terrible destruction in these two cities. And what happened there in Japan in 1945 is an important warning to all of us of the terrible power of these weapons. But the main thing we need to understand about Hiroshima and Nagasaki is that they do not begin to prepare us for the level of destruction that will accompany a nuclear war today. A large city like Moscow or New York or Washington will not be attacked with one small nuclear weapon. It will be attacked with 10 or 15 or 20 weapons, each of which 30 to 50 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. And that level of destruction can be described quite accurately using the model of a single very large 20 megaton explosion. Within 1,000th of a second of the detonation of that bomb, a fireball would form, reaching out for 3 kilometers in every direction. Within this area, the temperature would rise to hotter than the surface of the sun, and everything would be vaporized. The buildings, the trees, the people, the upper level of the earth itself would disappear. To a distance of 6 kilometers in every direction, the explosion would generate winds greater than 1,000 kilometers per hour. Mechanical forces of this magnitude destroy anything that human beings can build. To a distance of 9 kilometers in every direction, the heat would be so intense that automobiles would melt. And to a distance of 25 kilometers in every direction, the heat would still be so intense that everything flammable would burn. Wood, cloth, paper, gasoline, plastic, it would all ignite. Hundreds of thousands of fires, which over the next half hour would coalesce into a firestorm, 50 kilometers across. Within this entire area, the temperatures would rise to 800 degrees centigrade. All of the oxygen would be consumed, and every living thing would die. In the case of a large city like New York, perhaps 15 million people dead in a half an hour. And if this were part of a full-scale war between the United States and Russia, this level of destruction would occur in every major city in both countries. And if NATO were drawn into the conflict, most of the great cities in Europe and Canada as well. All told, perhaps 300 to 500 million people dead in an afternoon. But this is only part of the story, because the climate disruption would be an even greater catastrophe. A war between India and Pakistan drops temperatures around the planet a degree or two. A war between the US and Russia drops temperatures across the planet 8 degrees centigrade. In the interior regions of North America and Eurasia, the temperatures drop 25 to 30 degrees centigrade. We have not seen conditions on this planet that cold since the last ice age, and we would essentially be creating a new man-made nuclear ice age, as a result of which all of the ecosystems which have developed in the last 10,000 years would collapse, food production would stop, and the vast majority of the human race would starve to death. Under these conditions, it is possible we would become extinct as a species. Now, this is not the plot of some bad movie. This is the danger we are living with every day that we allow these weapons to continue to exist. There have been many occasions on which we have come within minutes of nuclear war. And on each of these occasions, we have been saved not because we have good technology, not because we have wise leaders, not because we have sound military doctrine, but because we have been unbelievably lucky. And sooner or later, our luck will run out. If we do not get rid of these weapons, it is not a question of if there will be a nuclear war. It is simply a question of when will there be a nuclear war. But the other side of this story is also important, because this is not the future that we must live. Nuclear weapons are not a force of nature. They are not an asteroid coming at us from outer space. They're little machines about the size of this table, and we know how to take them apart. We have already dismantled more than 50,000 of these weapons. We are simply lacking the political will to dismantle the 14,000 that remain. And that's where all of us come in. You have heard, talking to the young people in this audience, many times during the course of this summit, people express our gratitude for the activism which you are showing and our trust in your leadership in the future. I think it's probably been somewhat gratifying to you to hear this, but it's probably been kind of scary too. It's like we're dumping all these problems on your shoulders. We are, in a sense, but we're not going to leave the struggle ourselves. All of us are committed to staying with this, in this struggle with you. But all of us need to face the reality that unless we take decisive action, everything that we cherish is going to disappear. And this is a great burden that we all shoulder. But I think we need to look at it also as a real gift. This summit asks us, how will we leave our mark for peace? Those of us living today have the ability to leave as our mark the saving of the world. And so let's do that. The next speaker, my colleague on the steering group of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, will talk to you about specifically the things that we can do. My charge to you simply now is to urge you to listen to what she says and to make sure that you do not abandon this struggle, that you take up this struggle, and so that at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future, you can look in the mirror and say, I helped to save the world. Thank you.